My next guest, he needs no introduction, but let me give him one anyway. He's the first and only man to lead Southern Indiana to a Division II national championship, the first and only man to take Milwaukee to a Sweet 16, the first man to take Tennessee to the Elite Eight, and the first and only man to take Auburn to the Final Four. And now his Tigers are ranked number one in the CBS Sports Top 25 and won for the 48th consecutive day, and they are on track to win what is not only the toughest league in America, but could go down in history as the toughest league in the history of college basketball. I am, of course, talking about Bruce Pearl at Auburn, and he joins me now. BP, it's Gary. How you doing, man?
I'm doing great, Gary. That was a wonderful, wonderful introduction. The only pause I would have in the introduction is the on track to win the SEC championship, because I recognize that we've got a 2-game lead, but I also recognize I'm not sure if Florida loses again. We have 4 straight against ranked opponents, so we got a lot of work to do the next couple of weeks.
It is never a night off, and let's talk about that for a second, because you've coached a lot of different versions of the SEC, and obviously there's never been one deeper than this, with more national championship contenders than this. Based on current projections, the league could get 13 teams in the NCAA tournament. No league has ever put more than 11. What's it like been coaching in this game after game, week after week? And are you surprised, frankly, that you barely lost?
Well, yeah, I think yes to all that. I mean, I think that the reason for the league being so good is the commitment to coaching, commitment to facilities, commitment to the NIL across the board. There is not anybody in our league that's not investing in all those things, and everybody's in this thing to win this thing. And that's just not true in every conference in the country. You got some people that are really invested and some people that are behind. And so as a result, we have, obviously have a chance to make history. What is it like? Obviously, it's a grind. It's a physical grind. It's a mental grind. And we won't know until the NCAA tournament whether this grind is going to pay off, because we'll be battle tested, or whether or not it's going to be a situation where we're just, kind of worn out. I think the last question I have is because not only is the league really good, it's also really physical. And when you get into the NCAA tournament and they start blowing the whistle a little tighter, all that physicality and all that contact that that we experience and allow to let kids play through all that, which I think is the right way to do it. And all of a sudden you get the tournament and they start calling that whistle a little differently. Is that going to be a problem for our league?
It's interesting because I think when you talk about being properly prepared for the NCAA tournament or worn down for the NCAA tournament, whatever your opinion is, you can find something to draw from it. Like for years, Memphis wouldn't be tested in, say, CUSA, but I watched Memphis play in a national title game. Or Gonzaga not tested in the WCC too often, but I watched them go all the way to the title game. Then I've seen teams that have been incredibly tested, lose in the first round of the tournament, and all of this can go vice versa. Do you have an opinion on what's best? Because you are in a situation where if this goes as planned, you should be the 1 seed in the SEC tournament and should be playing on Sunday, Selection Sunday in the SEC championship game. Is that good or bad for your team?
Well, there's a lot to that unpack there, Gary, and I'm gonna equate it to football, because I think that I'll get beat up for this a little bit, but top to bottom, the Big Ten in football is not as strong as the SEC in football. You just go to Mississippi State when they're having a bad year, and half your kids are in the hospital when you leave the game. I mean, it is every single night. I thought our SEC football teams were exhausted. You look at Ole Miss's schedule and what they had to go through, the incredible grind. Now, you're at Ohio State or you're at Penn State, 2 teams that got deep into the playoffs, so on and so forth. Obviously, Ohio State was the championship. They only had 2 or 3 games on the entire schedule that were like about 7 or 8 games for Ole Miss or Alabama or Auburn or any of the SEC teams. And I think those football guys were exhausted. So and then the other thing too is, and you made me think about this, because Memphis and Gonzaga, those 2 teams are sort of putting up with their conferences January, February, March, and all they're thinking is about March. That's all they're thinking. They're so excited by the time they get to March, and they're playing against great teams they've been watching on TV all year long with something to prove, because nobody's talking about Memphis, and people are sick and tired of hearing about Auburn and Alabama and Florida and all these great SEC teams. There's something to that. I hope I'm wrong. Look, I hope I am wrong. And it works out differently. We'll see.
Yeah. Talking to Bruce Pearl, head coach of the top-ranked Auburn Tigers. I mentioned you're on track to win an SEC title, and you're smart to say we still got a ways to go, because you do. But I've compared you in recent weeks, Bruce, your team, to like a golfer in a golf tournament, but with like a 5-shot lead over the field. You could hit one in the water and 3-putt your next hole, and you still are in a good spot. Are you surprised that you've been able to separate from a resume perspective from the rest of the sport? Because as I was telling somebody recently, like, it's one thing to go win the best league in the country, the best league of all time. It's another thing to dominate it, and your team has dominated it so far.
Yeah. Well, I think it starts Gary, with the non-conference. And it worked out this year that the great teams that we played in the non-conference were also having great seasons. Houston, Iowa State, Memphis. Yeah. Those teams are all having great years. And we've been the beneficiary. We lost at Duke, but on the road at Cameron in a close loss. That obviously doesn't really hurt you. Purdue, their numbers have been great, even though they lost a couple down the stretch. So that really carries us into the conference schedule. And so, yeah, I would say that based on just the math, unless we fall apart here at the end of the season, and because of the quality of the teams that we're playing right now, we almost have a better chance to be the number 1 seed in the NCAA tournament than necessarily to win the SEC or win the SEC tournament. Just because when they seed the tournament, it's the body of work. I mean, again, it's the body of work. Now, we've got to beat Ole Miss here at home on Wednesday. That's not going to be easy to do. You follow that Ole Miss team closely. They're really talented. They're really experienced. And then we got to go to Kentucky. And they're one of the best offensive teams in the country. Then we got to go to Texas A&M, one of the toughest places to play in the league, and then we end up with Alabama at home. So again, lots of work to do. But what has carried us through this league, Gary, are 2 things. 1, we defend and rebound every night. 2, we've got a bunch of guys that were nobodies from nowhere, including their head coach. Okay, we got a chip on our shoulders. A lot of D2 guys, junior college guys, mid-major guys. I've got 1 5-star on my team, and that's Tahad Pettifor, the very talented, wonderful freshman. But the rest of the guys come from mid-major programs with something to prove, and that's why we don't take any opponent for granted.
BP, that leads me right to Janai Broom. This is a young man who, on the Auburn College Basketball podcast that I do with Matt Norlander for CBS Sports yesterday, it took us a minute to get to Auburn over Georgia. And I said, hey, let's not get bored by this, because they just went and beat another good team convincingly, and Janai went for 31 and 14. I know he doesn't have the hype of Cooper Flagg. I know he's not going to be the number 1 pick in the draft, but this is a young man who started his college career at Morehead State and has a very reasonable chance to be the National Player of the Year. This is not normal. How did this happen?
Well, it's the American dream. This is what makes our country so great, that you can start from humble beginnings. And again, a young man that wasn't even good enough in high school to make a decent shoe company team in the summertime in AAU ball. And so he goes to Morehead State, and what he does, he takes advantage of the opportunity, live in the moment, do the best you can with what you got, and you got a chance to be recognized for the next step. So what do? He goes to Morehead State. He becomes the best player in the OVC and helps Morehead State win. We get him at Auburn. His first year, that's a big jump from Morehead State to the SEC. He wasn't fast enough. He wasn't quick enough. He didn't move well enough. Well, all he does he's all SEC. His second year, he's All-American, and now his third year, he's running for obviously the Player of the Year. The difference in that race, I think, right now is simply the body of his work. If we have 14 quad 1 wins, and he's a huge part of what that's all about. He's our leading rebounder. He's our leading scorer. He's our leader in block shots, and he leads us in assists as a power forward. That just tells you what an incredibly valuable player he is. And in my running, if we continue to win and close this thing out, he is the Player of the Year in college basketball.
You and I have never talked about this, but just sort of thinking through it, I assume you can relate to his story a little bit. You were at Southern Indiana for a long time. You didn't get to Power Conference basketball till the age of 45. When you're a successful Division II coach, I know it's changing. There's no guarantee you ever become an SEC coach when that's where it starts, or at least that's where you spend so much time. Can you relate to Janai's story a little bit about do the best you can be wherever you're at and then see where that can take you?
Well, Gary, that's why I love my country so much. You know, we're a family of immigrants. My grandfather came over here at 11 years old in 1929 to escape the pogroms and the Holocaust, and he was a plumber, and he spoke broken English. And when he was 32 years old, he became a citizen of this country. He told me it was the greatest day in his life. And so I've gone to work every single day, trying to live the dream that my grandfather, gave me by coming to this country and taking advantage of the opportunities. And I think it puts me in a very unique position to tell my players, look, there are going to be obstacles based on the color of your skin or based on this or that, even your religion or whatever it's going to be, whether or not you financially have advantages or disadvantage. But those aren't roadblocks. It's just simply obstacles. And so, yes, we do feel that there's obviously some connection there. And, Gary, this is also a team of faith. This is a team that has given God the glory in victory and defeat. We pray before, we practice and play and the guys are, now with that comes a great responsibility. Every time our guys are knocking down a three, they're dialing up the Lord. And it's begun to catch on. I've gotten so many emails from parents going, my daughter knocked down a three in a little 8-year-old rec basketball league, and she's dialing up the Lord. I think you just put that all together. And then the last thing is this, even though this is the new age of transfer portal NIL, I've got 5 fifth-year seniors. I've got 3 guys that have been in the program for 5 years. We haven't had a ton of transfers, and so it's less transactional and still ministerial. We're doing it the old-fashioned way.
Last thing before I let you go, and I appreciate your time. I know you got a ton going on, but you are responsible now for creating the biggest college basketball game in the history of 2 different states. Number 1, Memphis versus number 2, Tennessee in the state of Tennessee, and number 1, Auburn versus number 2, Alabama in the state of Alabama. What does that mean to you?
Well, Gary, it's you make a living based on how you can teach and explain things with your words, and I do the same thing for you teaching basketball. You had to be in Memphis, Tennessee, back in 2008 to understand what that meant. That ESPN College Game Day was in Memphis, Tennessee, not Durham, North Carolina, not at Pauley Pavilion, not up at Michigan State, and I've said this a few times, not at Fog Allen, but in Memphis, Tennessee for the biggest college basketball game of the year, and all eyes were on it. I felt the same way when we were at Alabama, and the ratings proved that out. You remember back in the day, we used to have the conspiracy theory that television was involved in Major League Baseball, and if they didn't have the Yankees versus the Dodgers and an East Coast, West Coast in 2 major cities, the ratings would be terrible. No one would make any money. Well, guess what? Alabama, Auburn proved that to be incorrect. You put a great product on, it doesn't matter where these teams are from. The nation is going to tune in. And Alabama and Auburn are 2 of the best teams in the country.
BP, I appreciate your time. It's been amazing watching you do what you've done with this team. I know you still got a ways to go and you're not counting chickens yet, but to date, absolutely incredible. You deserve everything you're getting, and I appreciate you being here with me.
My brother, thank you. You know me from a long, long time. So you know, we started from very humble beginnings. Right back at you, Gary.
I appreciate you, brother. I'll see you again real soon. Bye-bye. That's Bruce Pearl, head coach of the Auburn Tigers.
The Gary Parrish Show, live weekdays at 10 a.m.